scream and shout with all your might.
The things I will do for you people.
Dig in your heels and hold on tight.
I have actually paused my Babylon 5's DVD.
Either you are wrong or I am right.
Just so that I can come here and work on this. I don't pause Babylon 5 DVDs for anybody. Ever. My mother showed up on my doorstep, dying because blood was running out of her wrist. I'd make her wait until I was finished watching Babylon 5 before I dialed 911. Yet. Oh yeah, I'm not really that evil, but pretty close. Yet I have paused Babylon 5 for you people. Utilitarianism in action. For those of you, if you're listening to this and you haven't, I'm not going to do the introductions, because if you're listening to this and you didn't listen to the first part, then tough shit. Utilitarianism in action. Example number 1, euthanasia. So when this came up in class, the first thing that was brought up was euthanasia. And Rachel's book, I don't remember the name of it, who cares? James Rachels wrote this textbook that we use in the book. It's a shitty book. James Rachels is an idiot. Okay, so we've covered that. He contradicts himself, and we'll be making fun of Rachels here and there as time goes by. In the book, Rachels quotes where Mill writes, and this is the quote, over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign, unquote. Excuse me, I just finished munching out, so I'll try to keep that under control. Now, of course, in this book, all the things we talked about in the introduction, where these things are conveniently left out, and the Rachel's book doesn't actually have much of Mill's writing actually in it, other than a few odd quotes here and there which are favorable to the perspective on utilitarianism that Rachel's is trying to present. And here's the problem with this. When Mill writes over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. I don't know why I can't say that word. This sounds good, but it doesn't actually work with the idea of what utilitarianism says, because utilitarianism says you have to do what's morally right, and whatever is morally right is that which creates the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people. What's morally right is that which fulfills the greatest happiness principle. So you can't say that a person is always sovereign over his own mind and body. I mean, that's an absolute. In utilitarianism, the only absolutes we have is the GHP, that you should be maximizing happiness, minimizing pain. So this is a contradiction of the entire thing that utilitarianism is about. Now, some people are going to say, well, Mill wrote this, so how can it be a contradiction? It can be a contradiction very simply. If I take a piece of paper and I write the sky is blue, if I take another piece of paper and I write the sky is green, these are contradictions. One of them is true, one of them is not true. Just because I wrote them doesn't mean they can't be contradictions. We have the same thing here. Okay, yeah, Mill wrote this, but it contradicts his entire philosophy of utilitarianism. And so it doesn't matter what he wrote. Of course, this is used as an excuse for why euthanasia should be permitted under utilitarianism, because over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. What if a person wished to be euthanized? I can't read. If a person wished to be euthanized, does this conform with the GHP? Maybe. Is the happiness caused by his death going to be greater than, in quality and quantity, the happiness caused by his continued life? And are you sure about this? And how are we sure about this? How exactly can we be certain that this will fulfill the greatest happiness principle? His death causes happiness for him, but that doesn't count. Once he's dead, he can't feel happiness. he also can't feel pain. So when you kill him, he doesn't feel happiness, he doesn't feel pain. Once he's been euthanized, he's completely taken out of the equation. For his family, his death will eliminate some pain, but a different pain will replace it, and this may cause some happiness. So looking at the perspective from his family, we'll call him George. If George is euthanized, if George is dying of something really nasty and ugly, right, he's in the hospital, he's suffering, obviously George's family is having some pain from this. When George is euthanized, his family's, the type of pain, the magnitude, the intensity of the pain his family is feeling is going to shift. There's still going to be some pain, but there may also be happiness, because George has been put out of his misery. All this is understandable. But now wait a minute. If George is kept alive, it's going to cost a lot of money. This is, of course, one of the arguments for euthanasia. It costs a lot of money. But think about this. George is laying there in the hospital, and he's pumping all this money into the hospital. Now, what you pay in the hospitals isn't necessarily what things are actually worth. Excuse me. I had to go to the emergency room a while back, and they charged me $300 and something for an IV. Now, I know an IV and the process of sticking the IV in your arm and the plastic tubing that goes along with it do not cost $300 and some odd. This is obviously inflated. George's medical bills are going to be equally inflated. George, via his family or via his personal finances or via insurance or something, is going to be pumping a lot of money into this hospital. Now, what about all this money? All this money is going to be going to the hospital and is going to be used to pay the doctors and the nurses who work there. That's going to make them happy, right? The money coming in the hospital is going to keep the hospital in business, and it's going to allow the hospital to help other people who are sick. That's going to make those other sick people happy, right? The hospital will, because it's getting this money, be able to buy new equipment to do more things, and will be able to buy supplies, all of which will contribute to making other people happy. If the hospital goes out of business, it can't cure people, it can't help people, it can't treat the injured. So isn't this going to cause a significant amount of pain? I mean, which is going to rank higher on the hierarchy of happiness? If you break your arm and you go to the hospital and you go into the emergency room and they put your arm in a cast and give you some painkillers, or if you break your arm and you go to the hospital and the hospital is closed and shut down and boarded up because it went out of business. So when we say euthanizing George is going to fulfill the greatest happiness principle, how exactly did we come to that conclusion? What about the happiness of all these other people? And the happiness that can occur far into the future, all of which is a result of George laying there in the hospital and providing a source of income. Euthanasia, number 2. In class, a question was posed by a student: what if someone wants to kill themselves for something that is not an incurable, unbearable situation? We came up with the example of Chad having bad arthritis. Chad is the teaching assistant for this class. Excuse me, need a drink of water. We came up with the example of Chad having bad arthritis and wanting to off himself. Spear stated that the decisions as to who was allowed to kill themselves would be made by a committee. Chad, wanting to be euthanized, would put in a request to the committee, they would make a decision, and Chad would have to abide by it. So now, we've already blown everything Mill said, which contradicts himself anyway. We've just blown that to shit. Mill wrote, over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. Yet Spear says if you want to kill yourself, you will ask for permission to kill yourself from a committee. And the committee will decide for you whether you're allowed to kill yourself or not. Excuse me. And at that point, you will abide by the committee's decision. Well, there went your personal freedom. There went your right to euthanasia. There went your ability to speak for yourself. You don't have a right to euthanasia. You have a right to ask permission from a committee of elitists, which is established, regulated, and controlled by the government for permission to be euthanized. That's a far, far, far motherfucking cry from having the right to euthanasia. If you think getting permission from a political committee to euthanize yourself is the same as having a right to be euthanized, you are obviously a utilitarianism. Randy, shoot me now. See, this is why I shouldn't try to do these after I eat, because my stomach is happy. That means my brain goes into shutdown. Well, that's true. Randy is pointing out that some people would say my brain is in shutdown all the time. This is a valid perspective. There are many people, many people in that school of thought. What was I saying? Yes. Being permitted to ask a committee if you can euthanize yourself or not is a far cry from having the right to request and receive euthanasia, unless of course you are a utilitarian, in which case you can't tell the difference. This committee is going to be deciding what your life is worth. How is this committee going to do this? Here we have the hierarchy of pleasures. If the only people who can judge the hierarchy of pleasures, the only people who can judge for the hierarchy of pleasures are those who have seen both sides, that means the only people who can judge whether or not, or not whether or not, the only people who can judge the quality and quantity of happiness that comes from being in a coma versus not being in a coma are people who have been in a coma. Right? Right? Of course I'm right. If this committee decides you have to keep living, then you have to keep living. So much for self-jurisdiction. Who gets to be on this committee? Who keeps an eye on this committee? This committee is deciding life and death for specific individuals. Can we really trust a committee appointed by, governed by, and you know it's going to be appointed by the government, you know it's going to be regulated by the government, you know if you think the federal government would not get in on something, and even in utilitarianism world, the government is obviously going to be in on this, because the government is the people who are supposed to be deciding the GHB and enforcing what's right and wrong. I mean, with this committee, what about the money trail? What about the potential for corruption? This is, these people, by these people I mean utilitarians like Speer, these people are perfectly happy to let committees make decisions for other people. This is frightening shit. Number 3, on a somewhat related note, doctors and euthanasia. Now, Speer has this little thing with the AMA. He's brought this up twice in class already, about how the AMA makes a distinction between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. God, I can't talk. Euthanasia, that's a hard word. The AMA draws a distinction between active and passive euthanasia. Active euthanasia would be injecting a drug into the vein of a person which will kill them. Passive euthanasia would be disconnecting a feeding tube. Excuse me. There is, and see here's where the problem comes about. Is there a difference between these two? Now, medically, that's not going to work. Medically and scientifically, there is definitely a difference between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. In active euthanasia, you are introducing to the body something which is going to cause the body to stop functioning. If this was not introduced to the body would continue to function on its own. In passive euthanasia, you are, say for example, removing a feeding tube. You are allowing the body to function function. Take two. You are allowing the body to expire because it is incapable of supporting itself. In the case of, say, a woman in Florida who's in a coma and on a feeding tube, she is expiring because, since she's in a coma, she can't go to McDonald's and buy a dead cow and stuff it in her face. Well, I'm not sure if that's actually a cow that they have at McDonald's. God knows what that shit is on McDonald's hamburgers. It might be dog. God, it might be something worse than dog. I don't even want to think about it. I haven't been to McDonald's in so long, it's unreal. And that's a good thing, and I don't intend to go there. Active versus path of euthanasia. I'm not supposed to be talking about McDonald's, I'm supposed to be talking about this. So there is a biological scientific difference between active and passive euthanasia. The question, of course, is there a moral, ethical difference between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia? That is, admittedly, a little more difficult to arrive at. Also, admittedly, I'm going to tell you that I'm not necessarily, well, see, I'm coming down currently on the side that there is a difference morally, and the reason I'm saying that is based on the fact that there is a difference medically. Yeah. I don't care. I don't care about the woman in Florida. Read my lips on this, Randy. I don't care. I'm coming down, I'm saying that there is a difference ethically, because there is a difference scientifically and medically. I'm also going to say, however, excuse me. Alright, excuse me, folks. I'm also going to say that it's irrelevant, but I just brought it up because Spear likes to bring it up. We're not going to... goodness. We're not going to get bogged down on this anymore, because in the end it doesn't matter. Because let us move on to some more important aspects of this. The question here is, why this insistence from people, typically Democrats, utilitarians, and other idiots, that doctors perform euthanasias? My question is this: you're laying here, you want to be euthanized because you're in terrible pain. Why do we need a doctor to perform the euthanasia? First of all, if you're too stupid to kill yourself, then you should probably be euthanized anyhow. And if you are too stupid to kill yourself and you want to die because you're in pain, because I'm going to be honest, if you're so stupid you can't kill yourself, you've got to be in pain, call me. I'll help you. I have no problem putting you out of my misery. Now, of course, the argument will be made that there are some people who obviously can't euthanize themselves. They may be paralyzed from the neck down. They may be unconscious in a coma. They may be physically incapable of, pulling a trigger or whatever. In these cases, should assist, and I almost said a dangerous phrase. I almost said, and this is an important distinction, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. I know you listen carefully to everything I say, but I want you to listen twice as carefully to this. I was about to say, should assistance be provided to these people so that they can euthanize themselves? The answer is no. And here's why. Because when we say, should assistance be provided, what that means is, should the government do it, and regulate it, and control it? And people may be saying, no, that's not what that means. That is what that means. Because as soon as somebody, whoever it is, a doctor, a nurse, Dr. Kevorkian, the plumber, Mrs. Jones, Martha Stewart, whatever, as soon as people begin to assist other people with euthanasia, the government is going to start making regulations. The government is going to start trying to control it, and eventually, just like the government is now controlling airport security, the government is going to take over. And just like the government is doing such a wonderful job with airport security, I mean, look what a great job they did on 9/11. The government was all over that shit. Just as the government has done a great job with the IRS, Just as the government is doing a great job with the war in Iraq, the government is going to do a great job regulating euthanasia and regulating the people who help other people commit euthanasia. Do you commit euthanasia? I guess that's right, huh? Do you commit euthanasia? The correct way to say this is, should people be punished for assisting other people with euthanasia? And the answer is no. Because this implies no government involvement. I mean, can I say, are people today punished for wearing a tank top in their house? Well, no, they're not, because if you want to wear a tank top here in your house, you can, at the moment, do that. I'm sure George Bush is working on changing that, along with everything else he's working on changing, like, freedom and civil liberties and all those other things he doesn't like. But for the moment, you can wear a tank top in your house if you want. It's not regulated by the government. So we need to understand here the difference between saying, should assistance be provided, which is what people like Speer would say, and the alternative, which is based on freedom, which is to say that people should not be punished for assisting others with euthanasia. Now, of course, that brings you to the point that the person being euthanized needs to make their intention, their desire, needs to make their desire to be euthanized absolutely clear. This woman in Florida, as I pointed out in my other ethics class, just reminds us how important it is to make a living will, to have actual paper legal documentation saying, if I go into a veg state, I want the plug pulled, or if I go into a veg state, I do not want the plug pulled. This is, of course, this is the one thing we can really learn from the whole Florida case. Everything else, all this other stuff is just media-generated bullshit, political-generated bullshit. The one thing you need to take away from this is, if you don't want to be in this situation, make damn sure you have a living will. I can't talk. Randy, we forgot to do that, what I told you we needed to do. Yes! We'll do that between the next episode, between this episode and the next episode. Don't let me forget. Let me go back, because I totally strayed from my notes. Let me go back and take a look at this. So the point is, okay, does a doctor need to be performing the euthanasia? No. Why? Well, first of all, why does it take 12 years of medical school to kill someone? It doesn't. 18-year-old kids in the United States Army kill people. They don't have 12 years of medical school. Doctors should not be performing euthanasia because, number one, it doesn't take 12 years of medical school to kill somebody. But the more important, the ethical, moral reason why doctors should not be involved in euthanasia is thus. Doctors take an oath to preserve and to save and heal. Now, I think we need to take this seriously. Doctors need to be honor-bound, to be duty-bound, to be ethically bound to using their knowledge to do only good, and to doing only good. If it was necessary to be a doctor to euthanize another person, then I would change my mind. I would say, okay, yes, doctors should do this. Just as I will say only qualified neurosurgeons should perform brain surgery. But euthanasia is not brain surgery. In a professional duty, a doctor should not euthanize another human being. And this brings us to an interesting point. What about in a non-professional? Say, for example, we have George. George is in the bed. George is fucked up seriously. He's in a lot of pain. He's dying. He wants to die. He does not have the ability to euthanize himself. He's paralyzed from the neck down. George's brother, Bob, is a doctor. Can Bob euthanize? Can Bob do an... What's the terminology here? Can Bob do an assisted euthanasia on George? Can Bob assist George in his request for to be euthanized? If Bob is George's doctor, the answer is no. But if Bob is acting as George's brother, not in a medical capacity, then I think the answer is yes. Because what you can do, what it's acceptable for you to do, what it's morally right or wrong for you to do, depends upon the situation. I mean, an equivalent example here is if I'm standing out here on the street of Fort Collins and I've got my M16 and I'm hanging out and I see this little 8-year-old kid running towards me and he's got something in his hand, I shouldn't just pick up my M16 and blow his head off. But if I'm in Vietnam and I'm hanging out in Saigon and it's the middle of the Vietnamese War and I've got my M16 and I'm an American soldier and I see a little kid running toward me and I see something in his hand and it looks like it might be a grenade, because remember, the Viet Cong did this kind of thing. They would give grenades to little children and tell them, run over to the GIs and throw this at the GIs. If I see that little kid running towards me with something in his hand, for me to point my M16 at him and blow his head off is perfectly good, because this is a completely different context. It's a different situation. It's a different scenario. Doctors should not be professionally involved in euthanasia. It is I'm gonna really go out on a limb. Many things that I'll say are morally wrong. I'm going to say that it is morally wrong for a doctor in the professional capacity as a doctor to assist somebody in euthanasia. The only exception I would see to that is if there were only 2 people left on Earth. One of them was a doctor and the other one was a crippled guy who wanted to be euthanized. Because I'm telling you, you can find somebody who's not a doctor to help someone kill themselves. I'm telling you, I'm here. If all else fails, call me. Oh yes, we're on section 3D now. You ever notice? I feel like Andy Rooney. You ever notice how stupid liberals are? You ever notice that the people who want doctors to kill other people are almost always the same people who are in favor of government-controlled health care? Now, isn't this convenient? The government is going to control the doctor, and the doctor is going to control your life. In the USSR, the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, where they had that wonderful political system called communism, the medical and mental health system was controlled by the government. And there were a lot of people that spoke out against the Soviet Union who either suddenly became insane and had to be committed to mental institutions, or would have heart attacks at just the strangest times, usually in the middle of the night, sometimes right after giving speeches in public about how fucked up the Soviet Union was. But utilitarians are people who think the government should control healthcare, because of course the government can be trusted to control healthcare. I mean, after all, the government, if it had control of healthcare, wouldn't do anything like, say for instance, infect black people with syphilis and let it run wild in order to see what it does. The government, if entrusted with healthcare, would not forcibly sterilize people against their will. I mean, the government, if entrusted with healthcare, would not test biological weapons on its citizens. The government would not, if it had control of healthcare, test LSD on its citizens. The government would not, if it had control of healthcare, expose its citizens to nuclear explosions to see what the effects of radiation would be on human beings. I mean, the government would not do any of those things because they don't need to, because the government's already done all of those things. And remember this. Remember this. The people who most want the government to control healthcare are also the same people who are running around saying the government is trying to take away a woman's right to choice, which is to say, trying to take away a woman's right to murder her unborn child. Now, if you're really frightened that the government is going to take away your right to an abortion, why would you want the government to control health care? Because as it is, if the government wants to shut down all the abortion clinics, they got to pass laws, they got to go out, they got to overturn Roe versus Wade, they got to do this, they got to do that, they got to actually shut down the clinics. But if the government controlled health care, if the government controlled all the hospitals and clinics, they could eliminate abortion like that. So you would think if these stupid-ass people were actually so scared of losing their right to an abortion, the last thing they would want is the government controlling health care. Yet here we are. And if you find most of these people who want the government to run health care and think the government wants to take away their right to an abortion, and you start talking to them about philosophy, I guarantee you will find a huge number of these people, are utilitarians. Thus, again, illustrating that you cannot be a utilitarian and be intellectually consistent. Number 4, euthanasia is an action performed or not performed. I can't read. Euthanasia is an action performed or not performed for an ends. Utilitarianism. God. Take 2. Take 7. Utilitarianism states that morality is in the ends, not the means nor the motive. Thus, can we say that? Right? I just found a typo in my notes. I should fix that. Sorry, folks. Bear with me. You'll appreciate this when I put the notes on the internet. You're trying to read my chaotic thought pattern. Thus, we can say that euthanasia is morally correct and thus can we say, take 74. Euthanasia is an action performed or not performed for an ends. Utilitarianism states that morality is in the ends, not the means nor the motive. Thus, can we say that euthanasia is morally correct and permissible under utilitarianism? No, it's not. We can't say that. It is only permissible if the end satisfies the GHP. Who's going to make this decision? How do they make this decision? Where do they get the numbers? You cannot say that euthanasia is morally acceptable under utilitarianism. You can only say it's acceptable when it fulfills the GHP. And here's the thing too. Does utilitarianism allow us to make blanket statements? I mean, can you say that if euthanasia fills the GHP in one particular circumstance, does that mean it fulfills the GHP in every circumstance? Do we get to make... Well, no, wait a minute. We can't make that kind of blanket statement because... Well... Now remember, in the first one I said that after the introduction that objectivity would go out the window and I would be biased. But see, this is why I'm better than the rest of you. Because see, even here I have to stop and think if what I'm saying is actually true. I could say it anyway and pretend it's true, just to make my side look better. But I don't have to do that, because you see, this is the advantage of always being right. When you're always right, like I am, you don't have to lie, you don't have to make things up. You can be objective and honest and truthful and attempt to evaluate the thoughts that are occurring in your brain. You don't have to just mindlessly repeat whatever the fuck you saw on television. Now, I was about to say, if we say that euthanasia has in one case fulfilled the GHP, that means euthanasia always fulfills the GHP. Does that mean that we have transferred the moral value from the final result of euthanasia to the act of euthanasia? You know what? I don't know. I'm going to have to think about this. We have to think about this, Randy. See, this, you'll never hear this from anybody on television. You'll never hear somebody on television go, I have to think about that. Because they all have their answers. You'll never hear your professors say that either. Unless they're a really, really good one. But the ones who have an answer for everything, those are the most brain-dead motherfuckers who ever stand in front of a classroom. Because you can't tell me, even if this person's been teaching 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, you can't tell me he's got the fucking answer to every single question. I have to think about that. Let me put down my notes. We'll come back to that. We're on number 5. In another interesting moment, we discussed in class the person having to pull the plug, how the action would affect the person, etc. Speer said, this is a quote, "If I were asked to pull the plug, that would cause me problems, so the government should step in," unquote. Now let's take a look at what kind of person would have to say something like this. He's saying the government should step in and perform the action which he, Speer, wants performed, euthanasia, because to perform that action would cause him, Speer, problems, whatever the hell the word problems means. Yet at the same time, Speer claims that euthanasia is morally correct. Now my first question is this: if an action is morally correct, why would performing it cause the person performing it problems? I mean, the only time I ever have ethical or moral problems is if I'm doing something that I know is wrong. So Speer says if he had to perform euthanasia on somebody, this would cause him problems. This is clue number 1 that Speer knows. And this is really interesting because, see, I don't think helping somebody... Well, boy, this is... See, we're going to tangent here. See, I don't think that euthanasia is wrong. So I wouldn't have a problem with it. Speer obviously thinks that euthanasia is morally wrong, otherwise he wouldn't have a problem with it. So that makes us say, why does he think euthanasia is morally wrong? And I'm going to tell you why. Because liberals, utilitarians, the kind of people who fall into the category of people who are utilitarians, are actually interested in euthanasia not because they want sick or hurt or people in pain to be relieved of these things. I mean, first of all, if they wanted that, they would make some attempt to get the government to lighten up on the drug laws so that cancer patients on chemotherapy could get marijuana to relieve their pain. They'd also do something about the way the FDA hunts down and persecutes doctors who prescribe strong painkillers for people who are in chronic pain. And that's a whole tangent there, the whole story of how the government goes after doctors for prescribing painkillers to people who need it. So you have to understand that the people who are supporting euthanasia, most of the people supporting euthanasia, those of the utilitarian bent, are not supporting euthanasia because they want to end the suffering of these people. They're supporting euthanasia because they want doctors to have the power to kill people that they judge, how shall we say, not fit for society, not needed for society. And remember, because these same people want the government to control health care, what we're looking at is a system where the government controls the doctors and can set the standards by which the doctors are told to eliminate people who do not fit into what the government wants. That's a bad way of saying that. Let me put it to you a little more bluntly. The government, once it controls healthcare and once euthanasia has become acceptable, can then very happily go out and kill, for example, black people who are sick, or can very happily kill old people who really don't need to be euthanized. But remember, a lot of old people have a lot of money, and when you die, you have to pay your death tax. The government gets a chunk of that. What we're looking at here is not utilitarians who want to make euthanasia acceptable so that people in pain can be put out of their pain. These people want euthanasia to be made acceptable so that doctors, under orders from the government, can eliminate undesirable elements from our society. The poor, the sick but not dying, the rich, the black, the whatever other minorities aren't politically correct. That is what's really going on, and that is, I believe, why deep down inside Speer has this ethical problem with euthanasia, because he knows that the reason he's supporting euthanasia is for an evil purpose. If you really truly believed that you are only going to use euthanasia to relieve the suffering of people who are suffering, and you believe that that is ethically correct, why the hell would you have a problem with it? Whew, that was long-winded. Number 5B. Yeah, you thought I was finished. You're so wrong. Hold on, I have to... excuse me. I need to readjust this little stand thingy. Thank you there. Yeah. How are we on time? Okay, good. How much do I have left? Okay, we are getting near the end of this. Thanks, Randy. 5B. Utilitarians need other people. Notice other people is always the government. That's another thing. Talk to utilitarians. See how often they talk about the government doing things. Then remember what I said in the introduction. Utilitarianism is a moral philosophy designed specifically to assist the government in making moral decisions. The government, which has made such wonderful moral decisions in the past. You know, like Japanese people in concentration camps and, you know, wiping out the American Indians and the Tuskegee experiment. Yeah, I mean, great record of moral decisions we've got from the federal government. Anyway, utilitarians need others, the government, to do their dirty work for them because they cannot live with the consequences. This comes from being an ethical coward. Now, I tried to write this in my notes, and doesn't that make that much sense? I can explain this in words a lot better. As a soldier, having served in the infantry, I believe, and this is why I don't get and let me back this up. There is a difference. There's a difference between killing another man face to face and killing a man from a distance. Things like cruise missiles, where we kill people from 5,000 miles away, and things like dropping bombs on people from the air. These things are strategically and militarily necessary to win wars and to defend the country. However, ethically speaking, I do believe that the people who do these sorts of things are, how shall we say, not accepting the ethical and moral consequences of their actions, as is a soldier who kills another soldier with a rifle on the battlefield. When the war in Iraq started and all this other good stuff, you heard a lot of accusations about how the airmen dropping bombs from fighters and the people shooting the cruise missiles from out in the ocean at the Iraqi population and military and civilian were cowards because they were not confronting the enemy head on. You also heard, remember when those what was it, two guys or whatever, they had a little boat and they paddled up next to the American warship in the Gulf there and they blew it up and they blew a hole in it. I don't remember the name of the ship or anything over there. Remember how everybody called them cowards? Remember how everybody referred to the hijackers on 9/11 as cowards? I'm just going to be brutally honest, and some of you out there aren't going to like what I'm about to say, and I will, hold on, right now I'm bending over, and I'm dropping my pants and my ass is sticking out, and if you disagree with what I'm about to say, you can kiss this motherfucking ass. But I'm going to lay it on the line for you. Shooting a cruise missile at somebody from 5,000 miles away is being a coward. Now, now listen, militarily, strategically, it is necessary for us to have the ability to do that as a military force. We need to do this to defend ourselves. Now, I'm not trying to justify that war. I'm talking in general here. I'm not talking about specifically for the Iraq war or any shit like that. Generally speaking, it is necessary for us to be able to do that to defend this nation. But that doesn't mean you're not a coward for doing it. You're still a fucking coward when you do that. On the other hand, when you get on your little boat and you paddle up next to a naval warship from the most powerful nation on earth, and you blow a hole in it and die in the process, I'm sorry, but that is not the act of a coward. Now, you might say it's the act of a religious fanatic, and I can live with that. If you want to say they're religious fanatics, I can live with that, but they're not cowards. The same thing goes for hijacking an airplane and flying it into a building. You know you're going to die. You might be a religious fanatic. I won't debate that with you. You might be insane. You might be misguided. You might be stupid. You could be all of those things, but you're still not a coward. I know, I'm trying to remember where this is going. I have to look at my notes to find out. I don't even remember what the hell I was talking about. Oh, yeah, okay. No, I knew the military part, but I'm getting... So here's the next step from having said that. As an infantry soldier, going into combat, I'm out here. I'm in the jungle. I don't like to talk about fighting in the desert because I don't want to fight in the desert. You know why? Because in the desert, there's nothing to hide behind. It's just sand. You can't hide behind sand. Fighting in cities is okay. You can hide behind shit. Fighting in a jungle is okay. You hide behind the tree. Desert, bad place to fight. Bad, bad, bad. Nothing to hide behind. You're fighting in the jungle. I've got my M16. And I'm coming up the side of a ridge. And I come up there and I take a looky-pickies. And I don't see nothing. So I'm coming up over and I'm coming over the ridge and I'm coming around this tree. And boom! I see an enemy soldier and he sees me. And in a split instant, I've got to do my thing. I drop that M16 down and poof, I pegged the son of a bitch right in the fucking face. Because I always go for the headshot. He drops dead. Now, I just killed him. I just saw him die right in front of me. When that happened, there's something that happens there. I know I've done something that we can say in the long run is ethically wrong. But in the short run, I had to do what I had to do to defend myself. And while I can justify, yes, I was defending myself, because he would have shot me, at the same time, I have to, as one human being to another human being, I have to look at that man dead or dying if I didn't kill him outright. You know, if I popped him in the chest and he's still alive, I have to look him in the eye. And I have to know that I killed that man right there. It's very specific. It's not a general thing. You fly over a city, you drop bombs out, you come back, you probably killed some people, but you don't actually see the person you've killed. It's very vague. It's very nebulous. And the intellectual, the emotional, the psychological, the moral weight and responsibility is not there. It's not the same thing. When you see the person that you have had to kill, you see what color their hair is, you see what they're wearing, and you see what color their eyes are, and maybe you hear their last words. That's something that you have to take with you for the rest of your life. And that, my friends, is a great burden on you. And it has to be this way, because when something as important as killing another human being in war becomes easy for us to do, war is going to become more likely. Everybody thinks that soldiers are gung-ho to go to war, and that's why you people are stupid, and that's why, in my opinion, the military should not be controlled by civilians, because civilians are dumb motherfuckers who should all be killed. And when I say people in the military, I don't mean motherfucking file clerks either, or little bitches like that Jessica whore that, drove the truck in Iraq and got lost, and they tried to make it into a war hero because she was white and semi-cute, and she had a vagina. I'm talking about real soldiers. I'm talking about the people who kill other human beings. Those are the people who the least have any desire to go to war. At least most of them. There's always some psychos out there, don't get me wrong. There are some psychos in the military who just want to kill, and they're fucked up in the head, and they're dangerous, and they shouldn't be there. The true soldier who has to do the killing and put his ass on the line and watch his friends die, those people do not want war, because they have to deal with the consequences of killing other humans, and they have to bring this back with them. And this is a burden. This is a tremendous emotional, psychological, ethical burden. Now, what does this have to do with euthanasia? People who support euthanasia, especially support people being assisted for euthanasia always want the government to do it for them. Because just like Speer, they say, well, I want the government to help me because if I had to do it, I want the government to do it for me, because if I had to do it, it would cause me a problem. And you know what? If you can't step in, it's just like killing that enemy soldier. If you can't live with that, then you don't need to be there. And if you can't live with the problem, whatever that problem is for him, that comes from helping another person kill themselves, then you need to shut the fuck up and go home. And these utilitarian people, they want to have the government making all these ethical decisions, because the government might make some hard choices, but it will relieve them, the utilitarians, the followers, the idiots, from having to feel any kind of emotional response, any kind of moral response. I mean, look at all the people who attempt to justify putting the Japanese in the concentration camps. Instead of just saying what I did was wrong and I have to live with it, they're going to sit there and try to rationalize it away. And, it's good. The government, we didn't really do it. The government did it. And it's the same thing with euthanasia. The people who want doctors to perform euthanasia, the people who want the government to perform euthanasia, want this to happen because they are morally incapable of facing the consequences of doing this act themselves. And it is because they are ethical cowards. That's why I have no respect for these people. Number 6. In fact, Speer advances that in the case of euthanasia, what should be done is, and this is what he said, quote, what the patient wants, unquote. Yet that's not utilitarianism. We've already covered this. Utilitarianism is doing that which creates the most happiness, that which fulfills the GHP. Doing what the patient wants does in fact sound an awful lot like ethical egoism, which brings us to number 7. The only moral theory which supports the right of a person to have free and total control over their own life is ethical egoism. Now there might be some others. And when I talk about, I tend to operate, let me just read my notes. If you believe a person has the right, the word right in these notes refers to moral rights, not political rights, to euthanasia. Ethical egoism is the only moral theory of what I call the Trinity: utilitarianism, ethical egoism, and Kantian ethics. Kantian ethics, I say Kant. All the philosophy people say Kant. Kantian ethics, which supports this right without exception. Kant tells us we have a duty to stay alive. Utilitarianism tells us we have a duty to create happiness, which might mean staying alive or dying. Ethical egoism tells us we have a duty to do what we want to do. So in the case of euthanasia, ethical egoism fails as a valid moral theory. And we will return shortly after Randy and I remember to do what we're supposed to do during break. Yes. We will return shortly with Utilitarianism in Action, example number 2, slavery.